because we want to see, is there a disproportionate relationship between my household income level, and the only three that we look at, versus whether or not I have a certain type of service. We also look at a multivariate question, and that is, for example, how many people are in your household? What's the educational level within the household? And who's the primary user of these services? So I may say, you know what? I didn't have any problem with people working from home. I did have issues with school. And I look over here at the primary user. I only have three people in the household, but the primary user is an adult age 25 to 65. So again, when you read through these statistics, think in terms of interpret them in such a way that really helps what you're trying to do and not just read them as they are. Ooh, here we go.
Maybe a little different question. Is the purpose, I would think the purpose is try to provide broadband to every resident of the county. I'm assuming that is an unrealistic expectation.
No, I don't think it's unrealistic. I think that you have a scenario when most counties we think in terms of is universal service, as many people as possible, versus cost-effective service. Cost-effective service is only going to come when you have more than one provider. So what happens is invariably in this work that we do, virtually every county where there's more than one provider, end users are more satisfied. They're paying less money. They're getting better technology delivered to them, and they're getting better support for billing issues or technical issues. Can you balance the two? Maybe, but most counties end up defaulting to we want as close to universal service as possible. Now, uh, universal service is going to have some nines attached to it. Is it 99.999% of the county residents? You know, what about if you're in a rural county and if you think about how critical broadband is becoming to agriculture? So maybe I've covered 98% of the residences, but I've only covered 70% of agricultural buildings. Okay. I mean, that's a big issue because you may have a large farm where you have, a chicken house that's maybe a mile off the and it's another livestock area or whatever. Then you may have a scenario where if you think in terms of, you have your farm implements, you have a tractor, for example, that needs broadband in order to handle the plowing issues and the seeding components. Or you may have broadband requirements to assess, soil acidity, moisture in the soil, the chemicals in the soil, do that sort of thing. I know we went up to Halifax County, I guess it was last year. We were working on a pilot project with them to put sensors, little fixed wireless stations throughout their property that would come back and then shoot back to the house. And the house had a broadband connection in order to be able to go back and forth, and do this stuff in real time. So universal service is important, exactly as you described, to make sure we have it not just for us as people, but also for the things that we do for a living.
I know that during the time when our schools were not operating in person, we needed for kids to be able to access the internet for educational purposes. And we just had areas within the county that did not have that availability.
Right.
It seems like when you're talking about piecemeal contracts to provide whatever the apparatus is, the fiber to bring something online, and you're doing it in small sections, then obviously they're bidding based on what's most profitable. There are going to be some areas that it's not going to be profitable because the cost of providing it is so significant. It seems like it might work better if somebody were to take over a larger part of the county so they get the profitable areas, and yet to get that, they have to be willing to take the less populated areas to provide the fiber to.
It's a great point, and we'll make that when we close this out in a couple of minutes. Every county that I work with is like Swiss cheese. So you have areas that are adjacent. I don't know how cheese is done, like these triangle things, So I got these areas where they're adjacent. Big chunks are adjacent to each other. So that's great. It's easier for me to extend infrastructure. But then you have to come back and say, well, what are you going to do about these holes? And so in my mind, it becomes an if-then. Well, because as you see, they're going to come and they're going to hold their hand out. They're going to say, Scotland County, what are you going to do for us? And you're going to say, well, I may do something for you if then. So if you can help me here, then we may be able to have a conversation. We'll show you that in just a second.
Maybe a similar question, and you can answer that in a minute. But if you've got an edge part of your county that's obviously near the border of your county, and there may be a municipality just across the line in another county, I would assume that those two can be linked together by a provider in order to provide service. If you look at the north part of our county, there may be something just off in Richmond County or Moore County that they could pull off of to provide it there. I would assume there's nothing prohibited.
No, and that's an advantage of what the COG brings to the table, because they're thinking not only in terms of individual municipalities and counties, but also regions and interregional work. I think that you're bringing up a great question, because the more you guys understand these various components, understand what makes sense, what's logical, what you can do, what you can't do, then the better equipped you are to make decisions. Those are great questions. I hid this. As promised, census blocks. So we talked about this. I'll just show you. This is where your responses came from. You know your population density intimately. I don't. We don't. So you can look at this and say, oh, it makes sense that we got a few up here because there aren't many people living there. We got a lot down here because we got a lot of people. And understand that if you think in the incorporated areas where there's probably going to be service, it's not just availability. There were questions in this assessment where we think in terms of adoption. If you don't have it, why don't you have it? And I think we'll show you that in a second. This was the home page. I'll just make a note that Sonia worked really hard to get images for me from all the counties, because we want to make sure that the website had pictures from where we are. So in different places throughout, each of these went to a home page for each of the counties. And within each of the counties, you had your own set of pictures. So if you recognize the homepage picture, that's great. If you don't, it came from here. So just so you know. So another thing that whenever we lay out the project plans for each of these counties, having done this for a number of years, this does not happen unless you're involved. And in this case, Sonia and Erica got very involved with each of the counties. They produced collateral. We set up, it would have been, I think, Sonia was at scotlandcountybroadband.com was the URL. So each county had its own unique URL, because if I'm in Scotland County and I'm participating in this, I'd rather type in Scotland County Broadband rather than, hey, tell me about broadband.com or whatever it may be. Local is very important. They worked on putting together these little cards for handout. There's a QR code. If I snapped a picture on my cell phone, it took me straight to the Scotland County BAT website. COG did flyers. We actually circulate these among other counties to show how you should do it, how you should be engaged in doing this work. Even extending so far as the work that we're doing in Illinois, Florida, and New York right now. We actually sat down with those folks because they said, oh, well, we're in Albany, we're in the capital of New York, and we'll send an email and they'll take care of it. No, it won't. So every county in New York has been looking at these to understand, how do you build collateral that's going to get somebody's attention, how it makes sense. That's a great slide, so I hope you enjoy it when you read it. This shows you our daily site visits. So whenever we do this, we can always tell when Sonia and Erica and David work with the counties to do something, because you'll see those little spikes pop up. Now, this is everybody. This isn't just Scotland County. We got hits from, as you would imagine, not only in Scotland County and the Lumber River area, but also from North Korea, Iran, Russia, China. I don't think they took the survey, but they may not have broadband either. I don't know. Over 10,000 visits, over 26,000 pages were viewed. So that's really good for a rural area. This is the graph I was alluding to earlier. Almost 3/4 of our respondents took it via their cell phone. Generally, it's half and half, 50%. So you guys blew it out of the water in terms of making this available from a mobile perspective. We see the browse and the operating system that's used. Here's where all the traffic came from. And again, this is across the whole site. And this is the time that people spent on certain pages. So you see Scotland spent 5 minutes, 56 seconds on the survey page. Our average is 545 to 445. And so you sit there, well, wait a minute, I took that survey. It seemed like it took longer than that. But I understand there are people that may start it and then get off the page. They answer one question, they're done. Or the only question that was required was your address and do you have service? And maybe they failed. Maybe they didn't know their address or whatever. So that took like no time. So if I see 556, that actually tells me that folks in Scotland County took the survey actually took a little bit more time to think about it and think in terms of their answers. We had 426 assessments coming out of the county. And this is an example of comments, and I don't know which county it was. Let's see, I feel the county should provide service to all residents. Oh, isn't that funny? I feel the county should provide service to all residents. Most counties that we talk to do not want to be in the broadband business. But tell us what you think, and this is what I think. Spectrum would not offer this. Seniors who can't get out, it'd be really nice to have more internet options. Just we really want to get some decent internet services. Please read those comments. I think they're very illuminating. Sample questions. So what type of internet service do you have in Scotland County? Fixed wireless, a big number. 32% of your residents have service that they had fixed wireless. Cable, 35%. A little concerning, you have don't know. We used to put a question on there which say, if you answer don't know, can you watch 2 movies coming over the internet at the same time and it all works perfectly? But people really struggled with that question, so we took that out. We thought, well, we just won't work with it, won't use that one. Can you purchase the speed of broadband that you need? This is a little higher than the other counties in the region. So I don't know and know 48%. So again, but you can look and see where the clusters are, and the clusters are going to tie back to being within city limits or near city limits where cable infrastructure is going to be in play. Why don't you have internet service? It's not available. Again, we didn't get many responses here, but you can see where it's scattered out. You got a few where it's too expensive. You got a couple other choices there. Trouble working from home. Have said, yep. You want to have trouble with school. High percentage there. Again, the gross numbers kind of take away from the fact that the percentage is high because you just don't have that many respondents that are coming in. So a couple things to think about as we sort of want, well, let me ask this. Any questions so far before we kind of get into the last part of this? Okay. So with the advent of grants, more and more grant money, this is kind of the simple equation that service providers are using. I will tell you from conversations with Spectrum and CenturyLink and AT&T, haven't really spoken to Windstream probably in 4 or 5 months about the county. These folks all have projects planned in Scotland County. They're budgeted in every county in the COG region. They got projects. They're budgeted. They're on the drawing boards. In some cases, they have preliminary construction prints done. Most cases, they've evaluated easement issues. So there's a project in play, and they know how much it costs. So what they're trying to do, their governmental affairs folks are saying, well, where can I get some money for this project? So through North Carolina Great Grant, through ARPA funding, through Reconnect, through RDOF, through the remnants of any other program, where can I get some money? And because they're the incumbents and they do this everywhere, they have an idea of what they will get through this process. So they've got some money they're going to get. They already know they're going to invest money. So there that number is. So there's the difference. What's the shortfall? And this kind of comes back to your question a little bit. What do I need in order to get this project moving? In some cases, it's financial, and in some cases, it's internal to their politics at the company. For example, Spectrum will tell you, well, they may not tell you, I would hope they would, but they'll tell you point blank, say, look, we're getting compared against every other project in our state, in our region, in the eastern part of the country, nationally. And the more places that we get local support, the higher our project grades out. So we had one county that we worked with where Spectrum told the county, said, look, if you'll kick in $4 million, we'll get this project built in 2 years. But if you can't commit to $4 million right today, then if you'll commit to $3 million in 2022 and $3 million in 2023, we'll get most of this project built, but it'll take about 3 to 4 years to get it done. But the hand's out. So this is what we're seeing in terms of how service providers that are your incumbents are approaching broadband. Now, to answer your question, CenturyLink or AT&T doesn't really care about the county boundary because that commonality of infrastructure will extend across political divisions. So it may be that if whenever you're looking at this and you begin to have the conversations with your service provider, which we want you to do, we want you to talk to them, say, well, tell me about Moore County. Okay, tell me about Hope County. Tell me about Robeson County. Tell me what you're doing in these other counties. What are you doing in South Carolina? What are you doing down in Bennettsville? Is there a place where these networks begin to come together and assimilate? And what's our piece of that and how does it benefit us? And then when they have their hand out, this comes at if then. Well, you think about you're asking for some money here, and that's great, but our goal is universal service. So what will you do for us to help close this gap where I have 3 people on a road that don't have service versus where you've got 500 people that are contiguous to where you already have network, but you have the purse strings. So the other thing that because you think in terms of North Carolina that, you got to kind of walk a tightrope, and I'm not an expert on this. I'm just saying from sitting in all these meetings in terms of what the county can and can't do, in terms of what the city can and can't do, but you also have to think in terms of what you will or will not do. I know I was in Johnston County, I guess it was a couple months ago, and we've had kind of an ongoing relationship there. And one of the conversations I had with the county commissioners was, as soon as you make a decision to fund this, very second you do that, it's not quite as obvious to people as building a road or repairing a road or replacing a bridge or repairing parkland or expanding sewer capability or making the landfill work more efficiently. This is a little bit different. So somebody's going to pop right up where you have that open forum and say, well, why did you spend it on broadband and why did you spend it there for those people? Because there's only 3 people on that road. There's 20 of us over here. Why didn't you do something for us? So there are all sorts of implications that you guys understand from what you do in terms of perhaps appropriating money for a service provider. We talked about this, the fill in, the unserved versus the underserved. So just some points to think about. Again, this is all in the handout. This plays into that when you think in terms of competition. So you got single provider versus multiple provider. Again, what's the goal of the county and where are you going to put your money? We do not see counties across the country that are our clients investing in multiple service providers. We see counties, should they choose to make an investment or to encourage, like she was talking about, reconnect grants or grant applications where universal service is the goal. Just a little bit of information about the technology. We alluded to this earlier, but this is just something to think about. If you're putting your money in, you're investing county money, taxpayer money, into a project, just think in terms of how this gets used. And I'll give you an example. There was a client of ours that invested in expanding DSL within the county. This was down in Georgia. And what they found is they funded that for a local telephone company. It wasn't one of the big telephone companies. And DSL was expanded, became more widely available, wasn't universal available. And the use of the internet outstripped the ability of the network to carry it. It's almost like you built a road too narrow for the amount of traffic that ended up on the road. If you think about education, for example, today we have Zoom and we have all these little boxes, on the terminal, and you're on your monitor, you're trying to see what's going on. Well, that's not where it's going to be in the future. In the future, you're going to have a camera that's going to paint somebody's picture right there, and you're going to see them walk around. It's happening now in areas. It's not quite holography because some of the physical media required for holography, but that's the way it's going to be. I'm going to telemedicine where I'm going to turn my knee around and say, this thing really hurts. Let me see the back of it. Let me see you flex it. And because it's a 3D view instead of a 2D view, that's taking bandwidth. Just think about this. If you're investing, think about what the future applications are going to require. That's why in a lot of these grant things, you're seeing a minimum requirement of 100 megabits times 100 megabits rather than 25. And think about the fact it isn't what you see, like movies and stuff like that. It's also what you send. I think we're on camera right now, so it's what we're sending out, what you're sending out to the residents of this county. And think about the amount of detail required in order to make that a reality. I think we kind of talked about that. We've got finals that'll be due to the county before December 31st. And I think that's it. So I will show you, I forgot these. I'll pass them around. The Ethernet cable, localized to be used. Single mode fiber, but there's actually 2 fiber strands in here. All right. And this is going to carry 100 times what that single cable carries. And I'll just let you compare. So went a little long. I'm sorry about that. But I'll take any questions. I hope this was useful. Everybody seemed to stay awake. But I'll take any questions anybody has. Yes, ma'am.
You said you want to keep everything simple, so I'm getting ready to ask a simple question. If someone came to the city inquiring about the broadband, we don't get it. What they're living is the sand hills. When they come, we refer them that this is not city. There are 2 different entities of services. I want to make sure that they live in the sand hill and they came to the city, we ought to send them to the county. Or
Well,
it's not related to us, or are we interconnected?
Are you providing end user services? Okay.
Not in, I mean, even in the city, we don't provide service to the home. All we provide in the city is the schools, county, city, and then our industrial users.
So
It wouldn't be city or county.
So,
Okay.
so the response to that, if
Someone that lived in the same hill came to the school system and wanted to know why they didn't have the service there because they can't get anything. So they came to the school system wanting for them to justify or why they could not get any of that service.
I think this kind of comes back to what David was talking about in terms of the digital inclusion plan and the fact that the region and each county are trying to figure out the correct path. And that sounds like it's not very action oriented, but you have to decide as a county the role that you're going to take when your residents ask you these questions, because it's not a publicly provided service like a road or sewer or that sort of thing. And I know I will look at some of our clients and I'll look at the county websites and they'll say, okay, well, if you're in the area, you need these services. Here are the services that come from the city. Here are the services that come from the county. And then here's who you can call for these services. So here's going to be, Lumbee EMC or Duke Power, Progress, or whatever the name is this week, so forth, so forth, so on. So you have a mix of public and private service providers. The question is, however, if you think in terms of traditional telephone service and power and that sort of thing, those are mature industries. They're out there, been around for 60, 70, 80, 90 years. What is the county's role? Because we're speaking in terms of Scotland County. What is the county's role in terms of making this information available to its citizens and publicizing it? So when somebody asks that question, what's the possible response? Yep, we believe that there's service in these areas and this is who you would call. Or, no way, Jose, but we're working on it. Here's what we're doing. And then the county is going to decide the role it wants to take. We have a county where I talked to the county executive, and I think it was like a 40-second conversation. Mr. Brooks, I understand what you're doing. That's great that you're doing that. We have no interest in this. Click. And that was that. But his economic development director for the county was wildly enthusiastic because he was talking about all the needs and that sort of thing. So it really depends on what you're going to do as a county. I mean, it's not something we can tell you. We can share with you what our experience is. But the county becomes the natural conduit for providing information to a citizen. So if somebody's living when I was growing up, I always called it out in the country, and I want to know what was going on in Stanley County, which is where I grew up. Today, I would go to the Stanley County website and say, hey, what do I see? Part of this is going to be you as a county galvanizing all the resources at your disposal to help advance what you're trying to do. So getting your economic development folks involved, making sure your hospital and your medical providers are explaining and understanding the value of broadband, getting the Chamber of Commerce involved to make sure that they're providing feedback and getting information back. And then you've got to decide, does it make sense for us to kind of lead this effort? or should we follow this effort? So I'll pick on Rick Hester at Johnston County. They've decided that they kind of want to lead the effort. So consequently, the county's setting up meetings with service providers. The county's putting out requests for proposals. Say, hey, we've got these gaps. You propose to us and tell us how you would close the gap. We may or may not have funds to invest because you don't want to sit there and commit to it. But let's see what your solutions are. So those proposals come in. You have 6 different people telling you this is how we would solve the problem. Well, now you have the benefit of 6 different points of view, and now you're more educated to determine, hey, what do we want to do? But when somebody comes and they ask you, well, what are you doing? This is what we're doing. It takes years to build a road. It may take years to get to where this is advanced. And, everybody talks about internet, but unfortunately, it didn't happen overnight. It takes a little bit of time and effort.
Yeah. Let me clear something up that you were talking about in your presentation with the city. The city went out, it's 2015, 16 with ECC. They did a study on our network. From that, we went out for an RFI to find a WISP provider. And just kind of to do justice to the guys we went with in Skyrunner out in the West, we moved forward with them and then found out there was a local group, a local WISP that we ended up on. So Skyrunner graciously just kind of bowed out and felt like it would be better to go forward with them. And since that point, we've partnered with Carolina Broadband, which is the local group. They utilize our water towers to provide wireless service to citizens in the area. So it's not, Councilman Evans, what you're asking, it's not through the city, it's through the separate private group that we let them use our water towers. So we try to, the competition is good and there's not a lot of it in the community. So I just wanted to clear up.
Okay, thank you.
Skyrunner didn't, they graciously kind of bowed out because we went through an RFI process, went with them, then after that, found out that there was a local group.
Good. Okay.
We did partner with them since.
But you think about even that dialogue. Would that group be interested saying, hey, let's go on some county-owned assets? An opportunity to do that. Would they be able to go and apply for a grant for equipment build out? Now they may not serve the whole county, but it may be that they're able to serve pockets. So they would need to say to you, you know what, if we can get 40 subscribers in this area, we'll be profitable, we'll cover our costs, we'll have support costs. Great, that may be worth backing or figuring out how you get support for that type of situation. And coming back to your question, it may feel like it's piecemeal. Maybe piecemeal is what it takes early on as opposed to having a big comprehensive build out. It would be nice if somebody would come and say, you know what, we'll do the whole deal. Most counties that we deal with, that doesn't happen. You do end up with this thing where it's different people that are putting these programs together.
And I will say, one of the assets that y'all really have here in Stockton County that a lot of the counties in the state, the localities in the state does not have, is that the city of Warrenburg has been grandfathered in, where they can do more with broadband infrastructure and internet infrastructure than a lot of local governments can do. And I think that can be a real asset to you because you've got more flexibility with Warrenburg being grandfathered in. Because right now, the General Assembly has a lot of restrictions in place on what counties and cities can do when it comes to owning broadband infrastructure. I know it's an issue that both the association and the league have been pushing for some years to have some of those restrictions lifted. I know there was a push in the last session of the General Assembly with all this ARPA money to come in. Those restrictions are still there, but they put more money into the great grant and applications. And that's one of the areas I really think our local governments can make a difference in. It's talking with those internet service providers, leveraging some of that funding that's coming through that great grant program to really help expand that broadband and helping providers work through that. So I think the results of this study are coming at a great time because part of what I know some of those providers have struggled doing in the past is being able to show, because of the FCC data that particular census blocks are really eligible for the great grant because of the way it's written. Our hope is with the data here, you can counter that argument and show we've got the results here that shows it's not there. So that's part of our hope of what we've done with the results of the study and ways you as the county, you as the city can use that information to help support providers in those applications.
So one other thing I would encourage you to do is to talk to Lumbee. Lumbee has a significant fiber network throughout its operating area, and they have been a longtime provider of internet services through Blue Wave, but that's mostly been in Robeson County, a little bit in Hope County. But they have fiber, a significant amount of fiber, all the way up here within Scotland County. So you might talk to John Dyson, who's their director for fiber at Lumbee, and say, "Hey, John, are you guys having any conversations about bringing service up here or utilizing your fiber to support another service provider?" Spectrum, AT&T, and CenturyLink would not use their fiber, but AT&C might. Other service providers might. Again, you're going to accelerate the availability of broadband access whenever parts of the network are already in existence and they don't have to be built. If I'm applying for a grant, I can include my acquisition of somebody else's network assets, the usage of that in my grant application. It's called an indefeasible right of use. I might be able to go to USDA or whoever and say, look, I'm going to use part of Lumbee's network, and that's going to cost me $2 million. And then I'm going to build another $8 million worth. All that gets included within the grant application. So it really is a financial advantage and a timing advantage to be able to get another participant. And that's why looking at the fiber, looking at the existing infrastructure is so important.
David, I guess my question is, this money that's coming available, is it up to the providers to apply for the funding?
The way the Great Green applications are written right now is it does have to be a provider to apply. A lot of the providers will reach out to the local governments to try to get letters of support, letters of commitment from the county government. I know Spectrum has reached out in the past. I know AT&C has reached out. They have reached out a lot about Wayne and Robinson. They have started to reach out about Scotland. I had an initial meeting with AT&C. I guess it was a year and a half ago, right as we were starting the study, wanting to know about some broadband data that we had at COG. At the time we hadn't had any. And they had reached out because they were looking at doing an expansion into Robinson County, coming across to get across the river. They are a telephone co-op that is based in Brunswick County. They've done a lot of work in Brunswick and Columbus County. A little in Bladen. I know they've worked with them on a digital inclusion plan. They've worked with Robinson. I think they're working with you yours here in Scotland on this digital inclusion plan. Bladen Star Communications is a big provider there, so they've done a lot of work there. They approached us at the COG about a letter of support for Great Green application targeting the Aura area and parts of Fairmont. They were successful with that application, and from what we're seeing, the contacts and follow-ups we've had with them and our board members on the ground, they're starting to really see that work get expanded. So I'm very positive comments from the work they're doing as a local service provider. I do think that is a key. I think getting broadband out into our communities is working with this local providers or local organizations to get them out. Because we don't have the population density across the region for the big guys. We want the big guys to do everything they can and do it. But the way we got electricity in our rural communities was with the Rural Electrification Act passed. We got our electric co-ops, and that's how it works here. And quite frankly, I think that's a model that has worked. That's likely a model that really get it out. We want the big guys here, we want them to compete, we want them to provide services as well. We want anybody that can provide affordable, reliable broadband here. As a local government, I think providing support to them for the applications. I know at one time, there was encouragement for the counties, and Kevin, you may know more about this, about setting aside some of your ARP funds to do some matches on some great grant applications or matching money for some work that the General Assembly was gonna do. I know there were some questions about whether you could really do that because of what the ARP response was saying. I do understand on the federal level, there has been a recognition of some of those restrictions on the ARP. So the House is currently considering a bill to lift some of those restrictions and move forward. I do think in North Carolina, we are at a disadvantage when it comes to broadband. Because of some of those restrictions on cities and counties being able to help build out an all infrastructure and really, bring it back. When I talk to my colleagues, the COG directors in other parts of the Southeast, they've got counties and cities that are doing like Marburg does, and it's successful, or their COGs are able, in Kentucky, there's several COGs that are actually the internet service provider for their region as an alternative to the private market. Now, I'm not advocating for the COG to become the internet service provider. We're happy to provide that planning or education there. But I do think in the rural parts of the state, that's going to be one of our long-term challenges. And I think that's why the association and the league have tried to work so hard on getting counties and cities more flexibility in working in the area with those companies.
But do you know, I know Robinson County just did their letter of support for AT&T. Did they vet out other companies, or was it just, they just look at them, maybe mention Spectrum?
I know Spectrum has requested in the past, Spectrum has got, in Robinson County, Spectrum has got a lot of other opportunities. They've got RDOF, I think they got a reconnect grant for part of that work that they are doing. I will tell you, the COG has done a letter of support for AT&C for several grant applications that they've done in the county. That initial meeting that I had with them, they said their challenge getting into our region was getting across the river. And once they got into the river, they were looking to expand out into Coke and Scotland and eventually Richmond, out with it. Kind of the approach I've taken at the time with companies asking for letters of support for broadband. We do the research, we make sure they're legit, we hear what the feedback is from other areas they're doing. But if it's a viable company, if it's a company that's providing good service, broadband's important. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't care who's providing it as long as we can get it provided. And so I'm willing to do whatever we can to help whatever companies we can to get it. Because I think one of the things you're going to see in a lot of the comments, and I want to say, I have started reading the draft of that report that Jeff has said. I was telling Mr. Gibson before we started, it's about 455 pages for the 5-county area. Each county, I think, is probably around 75 or 80 pages. And when you start reading those comments, a lot of what you hear is we need competition. That's one of the things you heard Jeff talk about, is competition to get better responses. So in an ideal world, we can have 2 or 3 providers. I think that would be phenomenal. Because as a whole, we've got an issue with universal access, but we're also going to struggle. The new tier ratings from the state came Robinson County is number one with the most economically depressed county in the state. Scotland is number two. Hoke and Richmond and Bladen, Hoke is our best, and I think we're 22nd. So if you're looking at 5 counties as a whole, we're a very economically distressed area. So we're gonna also have that challenge if we can get the access out there and having an affordable product that people can provide. And I think history has shown what helps drive down costs is competition. So the more competition we can have, I think reaching that universal accessibility for affordability is going to be that next challenge we've got, and making sure people can afford it. Because a lot of the responses you'll see is, I can't afford it, and that is going to have to be something I think that the feds and the state are going to have to figure out. Is it like the basic telephone access program that has been around for years for SNAP recipients, for food stamp recipients, where they can get reduced phone service? Is there a program that can be put in place to get that broadband access there? Because once we get the accessibility, then we've got to try to deal with that. Did that answer that, Charles?
Well, we have a resolution today, Kevin, for AT&T.
From AT&T, it's one of them. And with that, is there a practical limit on, different companies you can support for, great grants? Because the county's not placing funding to any of them. And the areas that on the map that I've seen that they're requesting for are currently outside of the service areas of Spectrum. So,
There's probably not a number that you can support any and all, but like David said, as long as it's a reputable company.
yeah.
And I think, I don't see a problem with that yet. I don't see a problem doing that. And I think when you're looking at the Great Grant, part of the limitations on the Great Grant, and I think the Great Grants are great. That's a little weird to say.
Yeah.
I think they're very well intentioned, but part of the problem I think we're going to see with the Great Grants, and part of why we've done this study, is some of those limitations with those census blocks that are eligible, because there are those specific eligibility requirements with service, and when they designed those Great Grant maps, when you talk to somebody at the NC Bio office, the State Broadband Infrastructure office, they'll tell you, we know that these maps aren't legitimate. They'll go ahead and tell you that the only data they've really got to rely upon is FCC data. So you have to prove that an area outside contradicts. Jeff told me a story one time that I love, about they had helped a county do an application for a grant. One of the incumbent providers came in, and with their study results, they were saying, well, we serve, it's there, it's available. And with the responses they had in that particular census block, it's like, what, 600 or something? And the incumbent was saying, we're providing it. Well, we've got 600 people that say you're not doing it. So either you need to provide it to them or let this application go forward. And they bowed out when they saw it. So part of it is helping to arm our local governments so that you can also arm those providers with that data. And, we'll get all this data. We're going to get GIS maps. We'll get all of the raw data at the top that we will share. We've got to figure out the technology part of how we're going to get that shared to all of the counties. That's part of why we've been talking about hosting our portal and seeing if we can, that we're developing for water and sewer, and seeing if we can put some of this GIS data. We'll be able to manipulate it, with the GIS data really zone in to specific parts of the county we want to look at and see.
David, thank you for all that you do, and we look forward to getting access to that information. Maybe not all 500 pages of it, but it's got more Texas Scotland County. Mr. Brooks, thank you very much for
Yes,
your
sir.
presentation.
But Commissioner Gibson, I do have a question. During the presentation, Jeff mentioned the county having a steering committee. A comment was made that there's a digital inclusion survey or
That's-
something that Mark Ward's working on. So who would get the steering committee together to make sure the city and the county and the schools are kind of on the same page and working together? I mean, especially since the city, we have,
That would be part of the conversation that we're gonna have in a little bit later. Going through the, because AT&T was also talking about helping with the digital inclusion plan, and one of the aspects is a local steering committee, that would have to be formed, and, Farnborough, the schools, the county, the hospital, probably St. Andrews, our larger institutions would be invited into that series.
so that the county would do that.
I would
said that
think that we jointly do that.
I told Mark we would be willing to help support whatever initiative I thought we could part of that.
And we will, I said, for those, very shortly, and then the board of commissioners will come back together, at 1:30 to address a couple of these issues before we go into a closed session. So unless there's any other comment that needs to be made, I will entertain a motion that we recess until 1:30.
So moved.
Have a motion by Commissioner Gibson, the second, I believe, by Commissioner Gall. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. We are recessed until 1:30. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning.
I got time to go home.